Hello and welcome to December's episode of Awesome Albums with Awesome Andrew. I thought I was going to be covering a Christmas album because, it's getting close to the Christmas season, it's December, and then I decided I was going to do something better. This month, I am going to be talking about the Rolling Stones album, Let It Bleed. An album that this month celebrates its 45th anniversary. The album came out on December 5th, 1969 in both the US and the UK. The album has a lot of dark material on it, and I'm covering it in such a happy time of year. Whatever. This album shares a lot of similarities with its previous album, Beggar's Banquet, in 1968. Those similarities being Jimmy Miller produced both those albums. Each side of the LP opens up with a very classic Stones song, and each album has a blues cover, this case being Love in Vain, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to talk about the band who makes the Rolling Stones. First, we have vocalist Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, who did guitars, some bass guitar, and even some vocals as well. Brian Jones, who did auto harp and percussion. This will also be the last album to feature Brian Jones. Mick Taylor, who played electric guitar and slide guitar. This is also the first album to feature him. Bill Wyman, who did bass guitar and auto harp, and Charlie Watts, who was on drums. Yeah, there were a lot of names I mentioned there, but that was because of an unfortunate change in the band during mid-production of the album. Brian Jones, who was kind of the guy in charge when the Stones first got started, was starting to experience some decline in his health. Mick Jagger said that Brian Jones was very talented, but also had a very paranoid personality, and not at all suited for show business. The paranoia came from repeated drug busts, his failing health, the loss of Anita Pallenberg to Keith Richards, and his obsession with being known as the leader of the band, despite the creativity shifting from him to Jagger and Richards. His talent started to slip away due to the endless partying, the too much hanging out, the drugs, the alcohol, not getting enough sleep, all that stuff that makes the rock star lifestyle, It was really noticeable during Beggar's Banquet when his moments of inspiration were getting fewer and fewer, and then even less during Let It Bleed. When he actually did show up, he'd be like, "Hey, what can I play?" And they'd look at him and be like, "Yeah, what can you play?" Little harsh, but I'm sure they had their reasons. When the band wanted to tour in 1969, they figured that Jones wasn't up for it. So Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Charlie Watts went over to Jones's house to accept his resignation. Jones wanted to make his own music, and he started making plans for a new album. And then shortly after that, on June 3rd, 1969, after a night of partying, he drowned in his pool. He was only 27 years old. A little bit later, Mick Taylor took his place in the band. Now, that's a lot of history that's leading up to Let It Bleed. And then when you walked into a store, this is the album cover that you were greeted with. The photo was taken by Robert Brownjohn, a close friend of Keith Richards, and the album was originally going to be called Automatic Changer, which refers to a feature on some turntables that allowed you to stack multiple records on a tall spindle with the mechanic to drop one record at a time after the previous records finished playing. The image shows an automatic changer with a stack of stuff consisting of a plate, film canister, a clock face, a pizza, a tire, and then a cake with the Rolling Stone figurines on top. That cake was baked by Adelia Smith, who will later be known as the Queen of British TV cooking shows. The back cover is just as interesting. The record is shattered. There is a piece of pizza on the record. That must be one record-breaking pizza. We also see patches on the tire, as well as a big hole in it. There's also a piece of cake missing. Sorry guys, I couldn't resist. It looked really good. And on top, all the figurines are knocked over, except Keith Richards. He's waist deep in icing, but he's still standing. Alright, I think you guys waited long enough for the music. Let's hear this fantastic 45-year-old masterpiece. Give Me Shelter. The song starts off with these shaky guitar leads, which give me chills. It's catchy, but it's also a little eerie. And then when you have those vocals come in, you know something's going to happen. It almost makes you want to seek some shelter. The lyrics possibly have a couple different meanings, like seeking shelter from a disaster, or they might be seeking shelter in the escape offered by someone's love. I mean, some of the lyrics are. Gimme Shelter is their most apt song to be known as an apocalyptic song, and is considered by many to be one of the best tracks on the album, and it's also one of my favorite Stones songs as well. We also have a guest vocalist who's appeared here. This is Mary Clayton, a veteran R&B artist who has already appeared on records with like Darlene Love and Ray Charles. She was able to hit those high notes that Jagger just wasn't able to hit, and she definitely added something eerie to the song. Vietnam was still going, and revolution seemed to be brewing. Rape, murder, war, it just felt to be getting closer and closer, and Jagger's lyrics just hit close to a lot of people. Some people assumed the song was going to be about Altamont. Altamont was anticipated to be almost like a Woodstock but on the West Coast, which unfortunately led to a member of the Hells Angels, which were hired as security guards, to murder a man who was seen running towards the stage. This was understandably scary to the Stones, and I doubt they would ever forget that event. However, Altamont happened the day after the album was released, so it's naturally impossible for that to be what the song's about. One more thing I want to mention is Keith Richards mentioned in his memoir, Life 2010, that he wrote Gimme Shelter on a stormy day in his friend Robert Fraser's apartment, not too far from where Anita Pallenberg was shooting for the movie Performance. The storm was so intense that when Richard looked, he saw umbrellas being blown out of people's hands and they're running like crazy to catch up with them, trying to get out of the storm. And then it came to him to write a song about the storms going on in other people's minds, and it just seemed to have hit him right then and there. Love in Vain is the next song on the album, and is the only song on the album not to have Mick Jagger and Keith Richards writing the song. The song was written by Robert Johnson, or Woody Payne as it says on the album sleeve. In the late 1960s, Robert Johnson wasn't quite famous just yet, but thanks to the Rolling Stones version of Love in Vain, it certainly got him a little bit more notice. The Stones didn't want to change his song too much, which was about being abandoned by your lover at a train station, but what they did add was they took advantage of the modern technology, and Jagger's vocals made it easier for the modern ears to understand versus Johnson's 78s, and they took it from strictly acoustic to adding in some blues rock in there thanks to Keith Richards' electric slide guitar. And there is a live version that is heard on Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, and that version is equally well known as the studio version, although the live version doesn't feature Ry Cooder playing mandolin. You guys probably recognize the song, but not this version. This is a more countrified version of the Rolling Stones' hit song Honky Tonk Woman. We hear a fiddle in the song by Byron Berline. He was recorded on a Hollywood sidewalk, which explains why you were hearing car honks and stuff in the background. Oh, we're in Jackson this time. In Honky Tonk Woman, we were in Memphis. Unlike Honky Tonk Woman, Country Honk has more restrained vocals. Jagger is joined by Richards and Nanette Workman, or Nanette Newman, as the album sleeve says. The song really went in a different direction when Mick Taylor got a hold of it for Honky Tonk Woman. Which I personally like better than Country Honk, but it's still neat to hear an alternate version of a song, kinda like how when the Beatles released Revolution 1 on the White Album, and then re-released it as a single known as Revolution, which had a lot faster tempo with a lot more electric guitar versus the more acoustic version that you heard on the White Album.
You want a revolution, well, you know.
And back to Mick Taylor. This was his first appearance on the album, and he played on this version a small Selmer Hawaiian guitar, which he played on his lap in regular tuning. And believe it or not, this is how Keith Richards wanted this song to sound. He's a big fan of country music, and he wanted the song to give that feel of a Hank Williams, Jimmie Rodgers, 1930s sort of feel. And in fact, it's actually based on Hank Williams' song Honky Tonk Blues. Graham Parsons first brought Jagger and Richards into contact with real honky tonks, sharing Merle Haggard and Jimmie Rodgers records. This renewed Richard's interest in country music. The next song, Live With Me, gives a feel of what you would hear on a Stones album during the early 70s on, say, Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, both excellent albums. The song marks the second appearance of Mick Taylor, and a key feature of the song is the dual guitars of Mick Taylor and Keith Richards together. We also have Bobby Keys on saxophone, Jim Price on horns, and Nicky Hopkins and Leon Russell on keyboards. Almost sounds like a band within a band in this song. A little thing about Keys and Price is they were very high-demanded session musicians who sold themselves together as a team, and they both continue to play a huge part of the Stones sound up through the 80s. In the song, Jagger plays up a cartoonish characterization of the band's image, which feeds upon the perception of rich, decadent rock stars with enough time to shoot water rats and feed them to geese. What? I don't know. Those are the lyrics. Jagger realized his image with the public and stretches it further satirically, and many of the lyrics poke fun at the band's situation as a surrogate extended family of the musicians, their harebrained children locked away in the nursery. Again, I'm just quoting the lyrics. The narrator of the song seems to have met someone and sarcastically asked, Mick Jagger knew that line was absurd and exaggerates it for effect, realizing it would scare off anyone who has any sense at all. This song, and especially that last line, as sexualized as it was, put some friction with the London Bach Choir, who participated with You Can't Always Get What You Want on the album, which made them not want to be associated with the album at all, just because of the lyrics of this song. Let It Bleed was the first Rolling Stones album to have a title track, meaning a song that shares the same name as the title itself. Let It Bleed was also recorded around the same time as the Beatles' album Let It Be, which, as you see, have very similar titles. This was actually just a coincidence. The way the song started off, almost feeling woozy in a way, with Keith Richards' slide guitar, and unofficial Stone member Ian Stewart's piano, Bill Wyman's auto harp has sort of a drunk sound to it. I don't know, that's what I got out of it. It's a blues rock tune with a jerky, somewhat uneven rhythm, sort of like a tipsy party guest who's had just enough booze but not yet entirely drunk, if that makes sense. Jagger gives his lyrics a supremely lazy approach which sounds both affectionate and mocking at the same time. The Stones were known for bordering on controversy, but as society loosened up at the end of the 60s, they started to get even more outrageous than they previously dared, particularly in the sex and drug reference. In fact, the phrase "let it bleed" is a drug term when you successfully find a vein, the syringe plunger finds a vein, and if the blood appears, it is known as letting it bleed. Another story was engineer George Cant, who remembered one session where Keith Richards was playing the acoustic chords endlessly in the vocal booth while Mick Jagger and Jimmy Miller were arguing about the smallest details of the drum sound. So Cant gets up from the control booth and goes over and fixes one of the microphones. And Richards is asking, "Oh, what's going on?" And he says, "Well, your singer and producer are arguing about the drum sound." Richards then says, "My hands are beginning to bleed." It's funny how quiet he was up until that moment. And then he says, "I've been playing the same acoustic for several hours and I won't be able to play it for too much longer, and I want to get this track done tonight." As Cant passes the vocal booth, he spots Richards' guitar covered in blood. I guess you can say that Let It Bleed was an appropriate name for the song. Midnight Rambler is one of the darkest songs on the album. No pun intended. During the 1969 tour, the Stones turned the song into a violent chant, drawing on the fears attached to twisted personalities such as, say, the Boston Strangler, serial murderer Albert DeSalvo. The Boston Strangler incident happened in the early 60s, around 64. And so then when the song came out in 69, the 13 murders that the Salvo committed were still pretty fresh in some people's heads. This is actually one of 2 songs on the album that Brian Jones contributed to. He was credited with the percussions. And in fact, the song was actually recorded during Beggar's Banquet era. The band didn't expect it to be a blues opera. That's just kind of how the song ended up, as said by Richards. The track's drama increases as the tempo suddenly slows to a grind, letting Jagger draw out words for emphasis as the band comes to a virtual halt behind him, interjecting drum thumps and a very bluesy guitar riff, and then the song slowly starts to build back up, starts to accelerate to its brisk mid-tempo rhythm for the final section. To make the song even more intense, they actually used part of the Salvo's confession for the rape and murder of 23-year-old Beverly Sammons for part of the lyric. The funny thing is, they wrote the song when they were on holiday in Positano, Italy. Richards and Jagger sat together in small cafes where you had Mick on harmonica and Keith on guitars, and together they started to work out the tempo and the chords and of course the story. And Jagger doesn't know why they created such a dark song in such a happy place. When they performed the song live in 1969-1970, Jagger created a morbid atmosphere and took the role as the killer. In fact, he would spastically whip the floor and the audience would scream along, and these performances were enhanced by a lighting rig that their lighting director, Chip Monk, no, he's not an animal, created for the band's 1969 US tour. This was actually the first lighting system to travel with a rock band, and they really took advantage of it for the song. You Got the Silver is the other song on the album, which features Brian Jones, and it's also the only song on the album which he is credited as a writer as well. The song is the first to feature Keith Richards as the lead vocal, unless you count the first verse of Salt on the Earth, which he sang.
Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the lonely bird.
But this is essentially his first song which he is the lead vocalist. They did record a version with Jagger as the singer, but they decided to go with the version of Richards instead. It's a tender love ballad about Keith Richards' new love affair with Anita Pallenberg. The song dips back into early 20th century American rural blues, but there is a lot of country influence in the song as well. Some view the song as filler between Midnight Rambler and You Can't Always Get What You Want, but the song did get a little bit more exposure when it was used in Michelangelo Antonioni's film Zabriskie Point. The downward chord progression of the intro of the song Monkey Man with the atmospheric use of the vibes suggest a suspense film soundtrack. Nicky Hopkins is playing piano, and even though he's not a member of the Stones, he's kind of been with them since Between the Buttons in 1967 and continued to be with them until Black and Blue in 1976. The song is a showy, tuneful track with a jumble of lyrics which make no particular statement. I mean, the first line is, "I'm a flea-bit peanut monkey, all my friends are junkies." That's not really true. Jagger sarcastically lays out the Stones' perceived lifestyle circa 69 through 78. Jagger and company never seemed to fully embrace any cause for politics, rather they remained aloof and instead posed as characters. Something interesting, Jimmy Miller assisted Charlie Watts on tambourine. Monkey Man is built on a very clever up-tempo arrangement, mixing elegant pop progressions with Richards' charged guitar riffs, and it's just a really great song. Alright, I think I've built up the song quite a bit already. I mean, I've already referred to it multiple times, so here it is. You can't always get what you want. The song features the London Bach Choir, arranged by Jack Nitzsche and Al Cooper, late Blood, Sweat and Tears on keyboard and French horn. Cooper got into his groove he had on an Etta James record of I Got You Babe. Keith Richards picked up on that right away, and he played a really nice guitar part which worked really well with it. When they had the proper take, Keith overdubbed an electric part and Cooper overdubbed an organ. There were over 60 voices that were used, and then they were double-tracked to sound like there were even more. The The song started off as almost a ballad until the end of the chorus, when you had the drums and the backing vocals kick in, and it changes it into more of a mid-tempo rock number. Marianne Faithfull, Mick Jagger's at the time girlfriend, claimed her drug use was the inspiration for the song. The song, as inspirational and uplifting as it sounds, has a lot of downcast subject matter. The lyrics are about how hard it is to find happiness, because no matter how much you have, you always want more. The song is philosophical, sort of like at the end of the Beatles song, the end with the line, "The love you take is equal to the love you make." You can't always get what you want. It's almost considered a Stones version of the Beatles song, "Hey Jude." The songs have a very similar structure, horns, philosophical lyrics, and of course the chorus plays a huge part in the song. Oh, and also both are 7 minutes each, so that's another similarity the two songs have. Charlie Watts, believe it or not, didn't play drums. He was technically unable to figure out the beat of this unusual groove and rhythm, so you had Jimmy Miller step in for drums.
I went down to the Chelsea drugstore to get your prescription filled. I was standing in line with Mr. Jimmy.
There are two theories on who Mr. Jimmy is. One is about Jimmy Miller, and the other is a reference to Jimmy Hutmaker, a local character who wandered the business district in Excelsior, Minnesota, a trendy artist community outside of Minneapolis. Hutmaker was known as Mr. Jimmy, who had some disabilities, but he seemed mentally sharp most days, although he did talk to himself. But anyway, after the Stones performed their first US tour in 1964, the concert didn't really go over too well, and so Mick Jagger went to the local drugstore to get a cherry coke. However, they didn't have cherry coke there, and who was standing behind him in line was Mr. Jimmy. And then Mr. Jimmy comments, "Well, you can't always get what you want." So, Mr. Jimmy was at the Stones' next show in Minneapolis. Legend has it that Jagger hired a limo to pick him up, but it was more likely that a businessman worked it out so that way he could go. Oh man, that choir, just so good. I'm not gonna lie, I have almost had a tear come to my eye at the end of the song before, because the song is just that beautiful. The song has some difficult subjects he's been dealing with, but for many listeners, the message doesn't go past the song title, a metaphor to the era's continuing disappointments, the falling short of one's youthful ideals. I'm not crying. No. Oh. What a close to that album. I mean, that album is just fantastic. I mean, when that album first came out, it hit #1 on the UK charts, knocking Abbey Road out of the #1 spot, and that is impressive. Hey, here's an idea. It's almost Christmas. Why not put it on your Christmas list? This has been Awesome Andrew of Awesome Albums, telling you why the Rolling Stones album, Let It Bleed, is an awesome album. And if Santa doesn't get you something on your list, just remember, you can't always get what you want. Merry Christmas, and I will see you guys next year. See ya.